I would now like to introduce today's presenters. Ashint Arora is a member of the pricing assurance team and assists clients on topics related to price, solution, and contract benchmarking. Rahul Gahani is a partner at Everest Group and a member of the pricing assurance team. He assists clients on topics related to price and contract benchmarking, strategic engagement reviews, and sourcing cost rationalization. Abhishek Sharma is a partner and a member of the pricing assurance team and assists clients on topics related to price and contract benchmarking, strategic engagement reviews, and sourcing cost rationalization. And Ricky Sandrani is a partner in the pricing assurance practice, leading the firm's cloud, infrastructure, and cybersecurity service price and solution benchmarking capability. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Abhishek.
Thank you. Okay. At the outset, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all the participants. As we're getting closer to the midpoint of the year, we thought it'd be good to have a look through both what I may call the rear view mirror as well as the windscreen, as in, what's been the situation over the 5 months that have gone by, and what seems to be the case for the 6 to 7 months going ahead, what's left of 2023. In that context, we have three main discussion points today. One, we'll talk for a bit about key themes observed in the 5 months of the year, right? Followed by that, we'll talk about how some of these themes are expected to play out till the end of the year, or what could be a tumultuous remainder of 2023, right? And then eventually, what are some of the core actions to incorporate in your mid-year planning efforts, right? So that's post that, we'll have a little bit of a Q&A. As always, we'd like to keep things interactive. We'll try to answer most questions at the end of the session, so please keep them coming. If you move to the next page, I'll just take a bit of a recap into our February webinar when we had highlighted that the market was at a bit of an inflection point, or a cusp, as we call it. As of May, the changes are much more visible. Let's take an example with the demand surge. Now, less than a year ago, demand surge was clearly talk of the town, right? And now demand uncertainty is evident. So clearly, a significant change in less than a year. Enterprises were focusing on diversification to ensure talent supply, whereas now the direction is definitely more towards supplier consolidation or portfolio consolidation, so to speak. The talent situation was totally an employees market, right? An employees market, which at least I have never seen till date in my 20 years of working, which has now, let's just say, become complicated, right? Something which we'll speak about in a minute. There's a bit of a nuance to that. And finally, we can now say with some confidence that the pendulum has definitely moved to a buyer's market, as compared to a seller's market, right? So significant change in less than a year. Rahul, I think as we start the conversation about what's happened in the first 5 months, talent, I guess, would be an apt theme to discuss in some detail, right? As seen on the next page.
Yes, Abhishek, absolutely. And you put it very aptly, when you said that the right way to describe the talent market is that it is complicated. While there has been some easing up of the supply-demand gap that was pervasive for the last 18 months, it's not as if it's a secular trend that we're observing. There are some roles, such as business intelligence consultants, operations specialists, team leads, which you see on the right side of this slide, for which demand is softening significantly. But then there are other roles such as SharePoint developers and firmware engineers on the IT applications, for example, threat hunters when it comes to cybersecurity, and on the BPO side, content moderators, and all of these you see on the left side, and for these roles, the demand is surging significantly even now. And between these two extremes, there are various skills that are either softly moderating or seeing a steady demand or are surging moderately. The implication of this complicated talent situation is that buyers need to take a very granular view at the pricing for their roles that they have outsourced. Else they might end up overpaying for a large part of their portfolio, or actually they may also end up looking for price cuts, where there are none to be realized. thus impacting the quality of services. So that's something important to keep in mind, as far as the P in a P times Q construct is concerned. Now, if we consider the Q part, that is the number of resources required to deliver certain services, a very important factor is productivity of the resources. So, Ricky, what are your observations around productivity?
Thanks, Rahul. I think it's a very apt point. And I think if we move a slide forward, we can just begin a conversation with saying that now we often see service providers offering to reduce pricing year on year in a contract. And this is in spite of COLA. And the reason that they are able to do this is because over the years in a typical 5-year contract, the impact of automation, analytics, process improvement, they're typically able to drive resource productivity. They're able to improve the resource productivity. And let's take an example here. So if you look at the chart here, this is a productivity metric for digital workplace services for remote desktop engineering. In simple words, managing end user devices like desktops, laptops, which includes things such as patching, software distribution, image management, and so on. Now, if you look at the index productivity number from H2 2019 to H1 2022, which is roughly about 2.5 years, you would notice that at an index level, the productivity has increased by 22 to 22%. Thus, theoretically, you could say that in the absence of COLA, the vendor may have been able to reduce their fee by 20 to 22%. However, in a lot of areas, the productivity improvement has now started to plateau. So now we are increasingly seeing a lot of Gen 2 or the third gen outsource deals where the incremental impact of automation may be limited. And that's what you start to notice in H2 of 2022 and H1 of 2023, where the productivity has started to plateau. So we're seeing this in a lot of areas, especially the more commodity work. And that's where we realize that the impact that the next generation set of technologies, automation technologies driven by AI, will play a very crucial role in the next set of productivity improvements. Now, going back to what we just spoke about in terms of FTE rate pricing, Achint, I think Abhishek did briefly touch about it. Can you throw some more light in terms of what exactly is happening?
Sure. If you go to the next slide, it talks about, what the TNM-based rate card pricing that we're seeing getting changed in the market. Now, one thing that is happening as a feature is that the pricing momentum that was really prevalent last year, right, and even some part of H1 2023, that has got arrested, right? So what we are seeing is that in the last 4 months, the pricing increase has been limited to 1 to 2% across location. Now, this is in fact and in spite of all the persisting inflationary challenges that are in the market, right? The buyers are pushing for RX fixes, which are targeting, more for less, which means a lot of vendor consolidation. Sometimes RF fixes are being floated out just to keep things in control, just to introduce that competitive tension, so as to get better rates from the providers. This is on the AD side, then on the AMS side, the kind of objectives are really different. Now, if we talk about the pressure, what exactly it is driving from a behavior standpoint is that even service providers are kind of re-looking at their location strategy, role-based pricing, and also alternate contracting models or pricing model, right? In some shape, the alternate contracting model is something that can really help the buyer groups, right? If we go on to the next slide, that is something different we are seeing in the market compared to the services space, right? From the software side, however, the market is like that the software vendors continue to push for sharp increases in the software licensing fees, right? In fact, it's not unknown, to see that 5 to 10% even today. And even one thing that is happening is that many of these software vendors also provide their own professional services, categories and services. And for that kind of services, also they are charging or asking for 10 to 15% increases. Now, that's something very contrary to how we see the tier 1 IT service providers doing, right, and being asked for. So something very divergent in terms of behaviors and what enterprises or buyer groups are, kind of accommodating for within this space. Okay. So Abhishek, so far we have covered talent, solution, pricing as the top 3 themes. What other themes are you noticing in the sourcing space?
Yeah, Achint, if we move to the next page, right, this is something again interesting, right? So the fourth theme that we want to talk about is the new center setup activity, right? Which has actually taken place, right? If you look at major offshore and nearshore locations such as India, Philippines, Romania, Mexico, Costa Rica, it just points to an increasing leverage of distributed locations, so to speak, i.e. offshoring and nearshoring. If you look at the uptick for 2022 in India as compared to 2021, it's simply been outstanding. I mean, it just compares 72 versus 158, more than twice as much in 1 year. Even though some part of this could be attributed to pent-up demand during the pandemic-related pause in activity, but still, it just shows a material increase and comfort that people are seeing in developing teams, which are truly distributed. This is also one of the offshoots of what a lot of individuals would have seen during COVID time, that even in certain context or situations where people thought, hey, this cannot be done remotely, it had to be done remotely, right? So a lot of this, even though it doesn't have direct kind of pricing implications, right, it has implications in terms of an overall operating model, and anything which has implications on that eventually does find its way into some of the commercial aspects, right? Our analysis also suggests that, for transactional BPO, the percentage uplift for higher offshoring or nearshoring has been higher as compared to what has been observed for application maintenance, probably because of the base effect. Generally, perhaps, on the apps maintenance side, the base already was quite high. But still, it's a positive direction in terms of distributed delivery, so to speak. Rahul, while the use of distributed resources definitely seems to be on the upward trend, are we seeing something interesting moving back to commercials on the pricing model side? Because this is always a topic which a lot of our participants are keenly interested in.
Yep, absolutely, Abhishek. And if you move to the next slide, yes. So the fifth important theme that we've observed this year has been around the increasing number of deals in which providers are trying to push for outcome-based constructs. Now, if we contrast this to the trend that we observed some years back, it was actually a case where the market was expecting a rise in the number of deals where we could see outcome-based pricing, if not the entire deal getting priced in an outcome-based model, at least some elements of it getting priced that way. But providers were reluctant to kind of get into such constructs, and in today's time, it's actually the providers who are pushing the pedal on this. There are a few important reasons for this. Firstly, we believe that even proposing outcome-based pricing models is actually it's kind of a differentiator for certain service providers, because in the market it's not as if each and every provider is doing that. There is a certain set of providers that we see who are kind of playing this particular tactic. So it's a differentiator for them for sure. In general, in today's times where costs are still increasing and pricing, as we just saw, is not expected to kind of go up by a very huge amount in the coming months, margin is likely to get impacted. And moving on to an outcome-based construct actually gives providers a leeway to improve their margins. It also provides a lever to pivot the discussions away from a rate card oriented discussion. So those are some of the important factors as far as the providers are concerned. Buyers are also showing interest in this area of adopting outcome-based constructs, because firstly, it provides a good lever to de-risk some of the large outsourcing programs. And when they are proposing a new initiative to their executive leadership, it's easier to justify the ROI, if there's a clear outcome that is being pegged against it. A caveat though, it's not as if all deals or entire deals are getting contracted in an outcome-based construct. Rather, a balanced hybrid approach has been observed, where only those services whose outcomes can be attributed to the service providers' efforts. Only such kind of services are having a part of the fee linked to outcomes. Examples of this include, certain system integration deals. For example, for the last 6 months, what we have observed is more than 10% of system integration deals had some elements of outcome-based fee in it. If we take some examples on the BPO side, a very good function where this is visible is finance and accounting. So 35% of the accounts receivable deals had an outcome-based or a hybrid fee structure. And if you look at procurement outsourcing, more than 66% of the deals actually had an outcome-based or a hybrid fee structure. Even in the cloud and IT infrastructure side, there are now signs of this, beginning to play an important role. So especially in the cloud FinOps side, for example, a gain share based approach is starting to become prevalent. So Abhishek, those are some of the important insights as far as the outcome-based constructs are concerned. Back to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Rahul. I think now it's time to do our our customary quick poll. If we move to the next page, let's get some feedback from the participants. So, a window will pop up. So we'd request you to please enter, which of the following is the most important non-rate card commercial lever likely to impact pricing in 2023. Please take a single choice. We'll give a few seconds. So I think some of us were internally discussing within the team that, all of these are such important levers. It's just that depending on the timing, the importance of these changes, right? Depending on which year, which part of the year we're talking about, it's just so evident that, things keep on flipping over and over. And in a few seconds, we'll see where this is leading us to.
Exactly. I think, Abhishek, last year it was all about COLA, right? No vendor negotiation was complete without a debate on COLA and FX, given the significant variations that we observed in these two indices in the market. But I think it's going to be something else this year. Let's see.
Spoken too soon, Ricky. Okay, so we have the results. COLA seems to be ruling the roost even now. And all the participants and my colleagues, pardon me if you've heard me saying this before, when I started working about 20 years ago, when I hit the 10-year point of my career, I thought that, well, this is going to be so smooth. COLA is going to be like a fixture. It's almost automated, linked to something, and there's never going to be a discussion. Consistently, right, every year I'm surprised, right, by how just more prominent it is, which index to use, how to use it, etc. So clearly, COLA and volume discounting, as we see, right, together make up about 72% of the responses. Achint, volume discounting, does that surprise you? That 1 out of almost 3 participants seem to be interested.
Not at all, Abhishek. I mean, I was expecting the order to be in the same, ranking, and it exactly ended up in the same ranking. Right, so volume discounting seems to be the flavor of the season apart from COLA discussion. Reason being that given the uncertainty in the market, right, as we saw in 2020 when the volume discounting really went off the roof, we are seeing it again being part of the discussion and the non-commercial negotiation lever. What I'm surprised is that deal signing bonus is so low right now, but I expected that because my assumption here is that people don't know how to go about it at this point in time. A lot of buyers in the market, right? But the first 3, especially the number 2 and number 3, which is volume discounting and COLA, are unexpected balance.
Right, absolutely. And I think volume discounting also plays in very well with the whole concept of vendor consolidation, right? As you're consolidating portfolios. Ricky, one of the things which I wanted your quick input on was, especially if you look at sole source discounting and deferred payment terms, right? Those are smaller numbers, but combined, they make up for about a quarter of the responses, right? Almost about 26%. Given economic, considerations, a choppy economy, any quick points on this? Do you see this maybe going up a bit as potentially we move into uncertain territory in the second half of the year economically?
Yes, In fact, I think we've already started to see some signs of it, early signs of it, where we've seen typically the providers who are historically known as being very hard negotiators, they've started to budge on some terms. They've started to offer better discounts so as to the deal remains with them and doesn't go to the market with an RFP. So things are starting to change. As we spoke about earlier, it's slowly starting to get into a buyer's market. So these are sort of obvious manifestations of moving into a buyer's market.
Perfect. All right. So thanks everyone for participating in the poll. Rahul, do we want to share what we had as part of our analysis as some of the commercial levers on the next page?
Yep. Yes, and indeed, interesting poll results. If we move on. So on similar lines, here's a quick summary of the non-rate card levers that have been visible this year in the engagements that we have advised on. So most commonly observed are volume discounts, even sign-on discounts, like Achin indicated, they are actually more common than what the poll indicated, as are relationship discounts. We're also starting to see what is known as offshore discounts, essentially discounts that come with higher levels of offshoring. And various other types of financial engineering measures such as amortization of transition costs, self-funded transformation. There are ample instances of these being implemented in recent deals. In some cases, we also saw discounts based on payment terms, essentially incentivizing clients to pay sooner, in an environment where they're trying to increase the permissible payment period. Also seeing instances of, offering discounts in sole sourcing situations. Again, this makes sense in a market where buyers are aiming to up the levels of competitive intensity between different vendors. So overall, compared to 2022, there is definitely a surge in inclusion of these mechanisms in deals. And, the main reason being that, with interest rates being unusually high, buyers are looking for such kind of flexibility to ultimately help push the deal through. Okay, moving on. So one thing is clear, for every client that has an IT or BPO outsourcing contract, there are a lot of moving parts, which make it quite complicated for sourcing and vendor management teams to optimize the contract. So, as a buyer, if you're wondering whether there is further value to be unlocked in your accounts, please do sign up for a complimentary price check, and analyst briefing on the top 3 levers that have yielded savings for your peers who have outsourced the same function. To sign up, just click on the link that you would see now on the chat window. After clicking, you can choose one function, between IT applications, finance and accounting, and contact center. And for the function of your choice, you can subsequently select 3 roles and locations for which you need the benchmarks. Once we get those details from you, we will arrange a briefing with you that will cover the price benchmarks as well as an explanation of the savings levers utilized by your peers in recent deals. Okay, moving on then. Abhishek?
Okay, perfect. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rahul. So, till now, what we've done is basically covered the rear view part, right? Now, let's look through the front windscreen, at the way ahead. 2023 is definitely going to be an interesting year, as many predominant impactors of pricing are likely to change or be challenged, right? Impacting both enterprise and service provider commercial behavior. So what do we expect in the second half of 2023, right? Let's move to the next page and talk a little bit about that, right? Okay, we spoke a few minutes back about talent. Yes, the availability for a number of skills has improved, right? But you recall I mentioned, and even Rahul covered a little bit about the situation being complicated, right? It's not completely eased as we speak. So is it all a rosy picture? Perhaps not. But we do see a clear distinction depending upon which skills are in conflict. For example, a number of cybersecurity, cloud skills are still hard to find because of the demand being high and the fact that the supply takes a long time to build up scale. Ricky, what are your thoughts on some of these aspects, right, as we see specifically around talent?
Absolutely. I think it's very important to distinguish between saying that talent situation is better compared to a year ago and saying it across that situation across the board, right? And let's take a couple of examples, areas that I kind of closely track, and that's cloud and cybersecurity. So let's start with cloud. So we've often mentioned on multiple forums that this year is going to be realizing value from your cloud investments, right? The last 2-3 years have seen enterprises do wholesale migrations to the cloud, and have often realized that cloud often costs more than what they anticipated. So this year is going to be about realizing more value from the cloud. And one of the levers of realizing value from cloud is really about looking at cloud as a modernization and not just as your infrastructure platform, right? Modernize your applications. One of the way, but to modernize, you really need the right skill set, right? Skill sets pertaining to Kubernetes, Lambda, containers, Dockers, and so on, right? And these are areas which are still very hard to find, right? Skill sets or people skilled in these areas still very hard to find. Let's take another example, right? Cybersecurity. There are ransomware attacks happening almost every day. Just 2 weeks ago, we heard of a large Swiss-based Swiss manufacturing firm having a major ransomware attack. Now, even large firms, Fortune 50, Fortune 100 firms are having these sort of attacks. So the skill sets pertaining to the likes of incident response or threat hunters are typically, again, very hard to find. So these are areas where we see that the prices will continue to remain very high, and enterprises may not have much negotiation leverage in these. So this is where providers will need to start taking a more portfolio level view. There will be areas where you could actually be more competitive, be more aggressive in terms of pricing, and there are areas where you could actually command a higher bargaining power and price premiumly. So enterprises will have to take that portfolio level approach to negotiating with their IT vendors.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we move to the productivity part, right? This is going to be big, right, Ricky, in terms of, as we move into third generation contracts, flattening of the committed ongoing productivity curve, right? Have we started to see that in some of the legacy deals?
Yes, we have. In fact, of late, a number of Gen 2, Gen 3 renewals that we sort of were reviewing, we noticed that the provider wasn't able to offer more than a 2 to 3% discount over their previous term. And this wasn't very off because they'd been working with their client for the last 10, 12 years, right? So all the low hanging fruits had already been absorbed. They had sort of automated most of the low hanging use cases, which they could automate potentially. Now the conversation really pivoted to doing more POCs around artificial intelligence, leveraging more advanced use cases, which required working hands in hand with the client really to sort of figure out what are those next levers of automation that we can talk to. But yeah, you're right. About 60 to 70% of the more commodity areas, we're starting to see productivity starting to plateau, and service providers not being able to offer very aggressive discounts that they were able to offer over the last few years. So that'll have a major impact in terms of how deals are negotiated going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And then finally, I think, the question on most people's minds would be, what about FTE pricing, right? I think as of today, we look into the future, we see mostly flat or minor increases, right? With some examples of reduction also possible where enterprises take an aggressive consolidation approach. So yeah, I think, if we look at the way ahead, the days of kind of, significant price jumps are totally gone. The things that we saw perhaps at the same time last year, it seems like a significant move from where we were.
Yeah, I think as you keep saying, the market has shifted again in the last 12 months, and it keeps doing these flips over the last 3 years that we've observed.
Right. Okay, perfect. I think if we move to the next page, I'll hand over to Rahul and Achin to also to opine about some of the themes that they're seeing.
Yep. Thanks, Abhishek. So, Achint, let me ask you, what is your take, in today's market scenario, how much impact do you think can going in for different pricing models make?
Okay, thanks, Rahul. So if you talk about my experience, right, T&M model is easy to benchmark, right? That is where, of course, a lot of discussions are going to happen because sourcing teams understand it easily. But also is the fact that T&M based pricing is susceptible to increase in cost. So inflation continues to be high, right? So all the providers are going to come back and ask for those rate card increases because the inflation continues to be high, talent remains complicated, even if not as bad as it was last year, right? So that's what's gonna happen. I think even if you talk about, models like fixed fee, beyond to a certain point being linked to at-risk fees or, some kind of service credits and penalties, those are not truly outcome-based models. Those are truly output-based models because the penalties or the risk is linked to certain level of outputs. A true outcome-based model needs to have a business impact, right? It can be, cost saving, but an accelerated one. And it should include a lot of areas, around revenue enablement within it. So as to kind of make a true business outcome, right? I think XLA-based linkages is a step forward in that direction in some shape and form. It's a middle path right now, but not the entire solution in place. I think what needs to be done is that the providers and the buyer need to come together to co-ideate that what do the true outcomes look like. And when I say true outcomes, it has to be business outcomes, right? And there needs to be a playbook that should be created, which can be then replicated across use cases and industries.
Right. And I think very important thing that you brought out is that, there is still that level of, muddying the waters between what is output based and what is outcome based, so the element of a business outcome being there is critical, for that model to be actually called a true outcome based model. Very valid point.
Yeah.
With regard to shoring and financial engineering, how do you think these two factors are likely to play out this year?
Okay, so as we saw in 2020, as we have seen in any sort of recession, right? So we do expect the shoring to go up. Again, we talked about, application services area where within maintenance, it's already optimized. So the potential seems to be on the lower end. But for business process outsourcing, it can certainly go up, right? Because the level of outshoring within that space is still lower in the market. Within SI other space also, we do expect the shoring to go up, right? Because not only the mandate is about saving costs for the buyers, even the service providers are trying to optimize their margin. So that is one area. Apart from that, we do expect financial engineering to go up this year. And this goes back to the slide where we talked about different kind of financial engineering options, right? And volume discounting is one of those options which is expected to go up significantly this year. So these two are going to increase as we have seen in any other recessionary or uncertain year. And we are already seeing all of that happen in the real time in the real activities.
Yep. And I think one thing which I completely second is the fact that, earlier there used to be situations where providers used to be proposing delivery from tier 2 and tier 3 locations, but buyers being uncomfortable with that idea.
Yeah.
And, because of all that has happened, during the COVID years and subsequently also the hybrid model being adopted, I think there is much receptiveness today as we speak.
Yeah. In fact, a lot of activities is happening in the tier 2 and tier 3 location, right? And that's also one of the levers that buyers can think of when they are trying to optimize their costs further, right?
Yep. Sure. Makes sense. Abhishek, back to you.
Sure. Thanks, Rahul and Achin. I think we're done with this section. If you move to the next page. Okay, so clearly, the mood seems to have changed now to point towards a buyer's market, which obviously sets a lot of bells ringing around, what it means, for enterprises specifically. Having said that, it doesn't mean that benefits accrue automatically, right? It's never that easy. Over the next section, I think we'll just talk a little bit about some actions which buyers can incorporate into their mid-year planning so as to make the most of this shift and enable greater benefits over the months ahead. So in terms of the first action, if we move to the next page, it's very important to ensure that you're getting competitive unit pricing as a buyer, right? And this competitive doesn't mean as of 2020, as of 2022, as of some data available from 3 years ago. It's as of today. The market changes, reference set data changes. Also, the whole competitive aspect has a lot of nuance associated with it that I want to speak about, and we'll cover on the next page. Okay, this is a graph which I'd request the participants to maybe glance over for a few moments, right? Now, in any portfolio, right, different rates will likely fall into various of these zones, right? Many enterprises would try to get everything into the most left zone, which often leads to low innovation or lack of investment, etc., right? Because nothing really comes free, right? Now, such an approach could work for highly transactional, keep the lights on kinds of services, but generally is rife with talent accessibility risks. Now, one of the things that we found that cases or portfolios or relationships seeing the minimal innovation and the most problems when talent was at a shortage generally used to be the one where most of the times bulk of it was lying in the zone of hyper-competitive pricing, right? So that's also something to be mindful of. Now, alternately, on the extreme right is the zone of inflated pricing, right? And there, of course, there's likely to be business case dilution. If I may say so, service providers may use high margins from one particular account to cross-subsidize a competitor, right, by offering better rates. So again, it's very important to look at which parts of the portfolio fall into which space. A competitively priced portfolio, in our view, would have rates in a mix of competitive and balanced pricing, right? And even some leeway for a small set to be in the premium zone for highly specific services, generally suitable in scenarios depending on the supplier, type of services, certainty needed, relationship, etc., right? So net, it's prudent to avoid pushing for hyper-competitive pricing on every service, right? The aim should be to remain informed about a very fact-based view on current rates being agreed in the market as of today, right? Because, given the millions of dollars spent in the portfolio, even a few percentage points here and there can mean thousands of dollars, one way or the other, right? So Rahul, while obviously this whole graphic is a good starting point in terms of shaping, the thinking around why it's so important to get things, to an accurate level of right, I believe there's also some scope to make structural changes on some commercial elements too, correct?
Yes, absolutely, Abhishek. And if we move on to the next slide, on those lines, the second action that we recommend for clients is to ensure that the pricing model or pricing models for various services in their portfolios are appropriate. And while we discussed a few slides back that output and outcome-based models are on the rise, when we certainly do not recommend force-fitting these in every situation. So let's look at this in a little bit more detail on the next slide. So it is essential to understand that, what are the ultimate objectives that you as a client are targeting, and at what stage of maturity is your relationship with the service provider. Changing the pricing model is recommended in situations where the current pricing model has outlived its purpose, and the prerequisites to adopt another pricing model are in place already. For example, if you look at new deals, that are getting signed, for the first time, with a completely new service provider, it's going to be very difficult to make an outcome-based model become successful, right from the beginning. Let's take the case of, let's say, application maintenance services. It's going to be more wise to kind of start out, with, let's say, an input based or an output based construct, and then gradually move on to, let's say, an outcome based model. And there's a very interesting example actually that we have presented at the bottom of this slide. This was a case of a client that successfully transitioned from an FT-based model to a per application pricing model for the ongoing management of its IT applications portfolio. During the first 5 years of the contract, the relationship was new, and trust was being built between the provider and the client. The focus primarily was on delivering high quality of services. Towards the end of the deal term, the client felt that while the quality of services was good, it was time to push for higher productivity benefits. The adoption of a per application model at the time of the renewal supported that objective very nicely. And the prerequisites around a strong volume baseline being there and a high level of trust between both the sides was already in place. However, had this pricing model switch been attempted sometime earlier, say, let's say at the end of year 2 or year 3, when these prerequisites were not there, that actually could have led to adverse outcomes for both the sides, and ultimately we could have seen the relationship going downwards. So Ashwin, with regard to the solutioning and the FT sizing dimension, any actions that you recommend?
Okay. If you go on to the next slide, right, the actions is clearly that, what we have seen is so far that a lot of sourcing and vendor management teams do not actually go into the details around solution sizing. Often even the IT category teams or the BPO category teams of many of the buyer groups do not, right? Reason being because it's complex, right? A lot of buyer groups do not even track it. And also they rely entirely on the service providers to kind of give them those insights, which can often be, floated in our experience. So if we go on to the next one, again, we highlight the fact that the bloat in solution sizing is so common that it's not even an anomaly anymore, right? We do see it in many of the contracts where in some situations it have been almost like 2 to 2.5x, even 3x in some situations, right? So which means that whatever money that you were apparently saving on the rate cards, you're leaking it out and out in the solution part, effectively paying a lot more than you should be, right? So enterprises should be also investing on the solution sizing, tracking the efficiency metrics and knowing that how do they compare against their peers, right? We do see that some of that also can be linked to user experience management XLA, because solution, if they're inappropriately sized, if there is a bloat or if they're undersized, it gets reflected onto the experience of the users or the teams that are used, or the IT teams of the buyer groups, right? Now, what also we know as a fact is that often in situation with the competitive deal, a lot of situation, it can be even undersized. In some situations, there are RFP and people are really competitive with their rate card, but no one talks about the Q part of the equation where it can add to a lot of TCV. So net, our opinion is that just don't focus on the rate card, because there are many situations, many examples live in the market where the rate cards were really low, often less than even the 20th percentile, right? But the solution was so under optimized that the enterprises were leaking so much of money because of that. Okay. Now, Ricky, what do you think is the next action we should be taking or considering?
All right. Thanks, Sachin. I think very pertinent point around reviewing the solutions. In fact, I was at a conference recently where I was speaking on the same about reviewing your rate cards, and a lot of people from the audience brought up a lot of resonated when we brought up this point that you just don't need to review your rate card, but look at the solution, look at how many bodies is the vendor really putting, because that impact has a more significant impact in terms of what you end up paying. So yeah, very, very pertinent point. I think if we move on, one thing that we've often again come across over the last 6 months or so is that in spite of being fairly obvious, many enterprises still do not have a rate standardized or a consistent rate card structure across their portfolio. And in a lot of cases where we've been involved and advised and help clients rationalize to a standardized rate card structure across their portfolio, those clients are actually able to save roughly between 11 to 14% of the spend with those service providers through rate card rationalization, role rationalization, and price benchmarking, right? Just making it more efficient in the way you contract and operate with these service providers. If you move on, I think let's just look at a few pitfalls or problems that arise because of not having a consistent rate card structure, right? Firstly, large number of overlapping roles, right? We've often seen so many rate cards in enterprise portfolios where a provider will have a programmer analyst, they'll have a software developer, and they'll also have a software engineer, right? And at times, all of them mean the same, but the client doesn't understand it. And at times, they really struggle as to getting different rates being quoted for the same set of role across different vendors, right? How do they compare apples to apples? Inconsistent role definitions, right? Different rates agreed for practically the same roles, right? And the example that I was alluding to, sometimes very broad segments for years of experience, right? We've seen years of experience range from 2 to 7 years of experience, right? Now that's such a broad range of experience. How do you know whether the vendor is really putting someone with a 3 years experience, or is he really putting someone with a 7 years experience, right? And the two will have a sizable difference in terms of what rates they command or what salaries they command in the market. So you need to have more actionable years of experience. Could be 3 to 5, 5 to 7, and so on. The role and skill tiers were all over the place, right? You do not typically want to confuse or mix skills or technologies into roles. You would not want to call developers necessarily as Java developers and Python developers, because what will happen is eventually the skills may evolve, technology may change, so your rate card will also have to evolve with the same. Rather, try and keep skill different from technology. And we've seen significant value leakage because of this in terms of both the commercial and the governance effort terms, right? How do you track and how do you manage such exhaustive rate cards? How do you compare between two different vendors who are quoting for the same project to you, right? One may come to you with rate cards from developer and testers and senior analysts. Someone else may call them completely different roles. And how do you sort of compare these two? Now, there are three tenets that we've realized are core to any sort of standardized rate card structure. One is job family, right? Be very clear in terms of what is the job family. Be very clear if it is maintenance, if it's support, or if it's development, or is it business analysis, right? Be very clear on that. Don't try and muddle between these 3 or 4. Second is define the role hierarchy very clearly. Clearly call out this is level 1 engineer, this is level 2, and define in terms of level 1, right? Level 1 could mean 0 to 2 years of experience, people just out of college, or 1 to 3 years of experience. And clearly define level 4 will be a person who has at least 10 years of experience, right? Just an example, but yeah, you need to be very clear in terms of what the role hierarchy looks like and how do you define it. And then be very crystal clear in terms of the description of each and every role. And again, at the example that I was alluding to, software developer, programmer analyst, software engineer, right? Some of them, in a lot of cases, all three may end up meaning the same, but different nomenclatures used by different providers makes life really difficult for a lot of enterprise portfolios. Yeah, so this is probably one of the first steps which a lot of enterprises have started to now consider, that we need to have a consistent, a standardized, rationalized rate card structure which we can practically use across our entire portfolio. Let's look at some more action items. Rahul?
Yes. So if you move on to the next slide, like we indicated earlier, we are seeing a lot of instances where clients diversified the vendor portfolio in 2021 and 2022, but are now seeking to consolidate it. And we believe before running a complex RFX exercise, the first step should be to separate the wheat from the chaff, or the better vendors in the portfolio from the laggards. So if you move on to the next slide, the holistic way to do this segregation is to use various objective factors, such as, which are the vendors which have provided more value for money or price competitiveness, which are the vendors who have performed better on the committed SLAs in true terms, not just in terms of, adjusted dashboards, who have delivered to the committed efficiency improvements, etc. And along with that, we also recommend looking at some of the subjective factors. For example, which were the vendors who, even in the troubled times of 2021 and 2022, were able to provide talent adequately. Who are the vendors who are more responsive during any kind of a dispute resolution. So, together these two different types of factors, we believe will help buyers identify, the right vendors, for which they should be foreseeing, an increased share of the wallet before they get into any kind of an RFX exercise. Abhishek, you recently led one such engagement, right? And with some of the actions that we just discussed were applicable. Would you like to talk about that?
Absolutely. And in fact, Rahul, we've got a couple on the next page, right? So if we were to kind of, look at the first example, right? This is interesting because it was a supplier consolidation effort from 2 suppliers to 1, right? Sole sourced with no reference to gauge how the competitiveness looked like from a rates and ongoing productivity commitment perspective. I think this was pretty quick, over 8 working days, right? We conducted a quick, strategic proposal review to help with about a 9% further reduction in 5-year deal TCV through alignment of rates and the continuous improvement regime, right? So effectively, I think, yes, we do foresee a lot of such things happening, quick to close, and then, basically locking the value in during deal signature rather than going on back again and again, just to correct things. Ricky, there was, I think the second example is super recent. Do you want to maybe cover it very quickly before we get to the Q&A?
Sure. This was a global retail company, a clothing company, and they were signing a large IT infra deal comprising of all the different towers, workplace, network, data centers, services, storage, compute, and so on. So in this case, this was one of the examples where one of the more difficult providers, they did agree to offer a reduction to align their overall fee with the market, the sort of the market median range. And in addition, they also agreed to agreeing to reduce about 15% on project rate cards, right? And this was accomplished through a comprehensive proposal review that we were involved in over the last 1 quarter.
Absolutely. Thanks. Thanks, Ricky. All right. I think we'll spend the next few minutes taking some of the, answering some of the questions which you've received either today or prior. So why don't we move to the next page and I'll bring up a few. Received was the degree to which we see the current macro environment seeing more shift to outcome-based commercial models. Would you want to cover that?
Sure, I'll take that, Abhishek. So we are seeing, a switch happening, like we discussed, to more outcome-based pricing models. And a large part of it is driven by, the current macroeconomic situation, and specifically within that, the kind of margin outlook or margin erosion that, many providers are kind of forecasting. Outcome-based pricing being one way to kind of counter that particular trend. We are seeing this happen for various types of services. We talked about IT applications, system integration services on the people side, finance and accounting, even, in cases of FinOps deals, we are kind of seeing a gain share based approach. So again, while all of this is happening, again, we don't want to kind of overemphasize and say that it's happening in a way that the entire deals are getting constructed in this particular fashion. Certain parts of deals, and certain part of the overall fee is getting linked to outcome-based models. So that's in a nutshell what we're observing.
Perfect. Thanks. Ricky, there was also one around, basically, do we cover cybersecurity services, pricing trends, anything you want to perhaps add there?
Sure. And I think the question was, I mean, does some of this analysis include cybersecurity? And yes, to answer the question, it does include an element of cybersecurity. We do track cybersecurity pricing extensively. Again, it comes with its own complexities and nuances. And of late, we've seen a lot of movement towards more output or resource unit based pricing models for cybersecurity services, things such as price per EPS, price for incident response retainer packages, and so on. And we've been analyzing the trends in that that market also very closely. And for some of those sections of the market, most of these themes that we spoke about, the plateauing of productivity, rates flattening for more commodity work, whereas going up for some of the more high-end work, those will continue to hold true. However, cybersecurity in the market, because it's relatively nascent, there are certain pockets of the market which continue to command a premium, and where we'll not yet see a flattening of productivity of resource productivity. And one such example would be SIM, where we're starting to see the impact of SOAR or starting to now come in, and it'll have a more major impact in the years to come. So,
absolutely. Thanks, Ricky. There was also one around key themes or decision points for a vendor consolidation approach. Ajit, I think this is right up your alley, given your involvement in some of these things.
Yeah. So if we talk about the different themes that we are seeing, right, when it comes to vendor consolidation, it can be around cost saving, one of those trigger points for all the different enterprises or buyer groups. Then one of the things that happens often in vendor consolidation situation is the fact that, there needs to be similarity of services or delivery experiences so as to do that consolidation. If, the experience is really different between provider X and Y, then it does not make a lot of sense to consolidate those two sets, right? Especially if someone is delivering a lot more superior experience. If you talk about the other thing, from an internal cost standpoint, for the buyer group, it's all about, managing those internal costs. Can we optimize by driving vendor consolidation for outsource scenarios, right? So internal cost being affected by the changes or decisions you make on the outsource portfolio. And lastly, driving a lot of synergies. Now, synergies do result in those cost savings, but ultimately synergies in decision making, synergies in reduction of overheads, all that becomes a really important factor when it comes to vendor consolidation.
Absolutely. And going by the number of questions on outcome-based, I think we'll take 2 or 3 of those now. And just a quick note for those questions we've not been able to answer, we'll get back one-on-one via email. So one of the questions was around, we just received, was around level of maturity needed by a client to effectively engage in an outcome-based pricing arrangement. Now, this is a topic which can take 30 minutes, but quickly covering the most important points, the way I see it. One, of course, absolute trust between both parties. One cannot be in a totally doubting mode and then get into outcome-based. It can actually be a recipe for disaster. But then 2 other points which are very important are that the enterprise needs to be comfortable with the fact that there could be a significant upside, right, for the service provider should they overachieve on those outcomes, right? So one shouldn't feel bad, oh, why are we paying extra? They should have given this to us, at the standard rate. At the same time, I think the service provider needs to be comfortable with taking up a little bit of that downside should things not go as per the plan. Because sometimes just to win the deal, we've seen everyone agreeing that, oh, we'll take the hit. We're planning to take things at risk. But post that, it becomes very difficult to kind of, really cope with the fact that yes, there are losses happening. So I think these are some of the elements which are really important. Rahul, I think you also wanted to cover one of the questions which I think was asked.
This was around, COLA becoming such a large issue in contract negotiations, and do we see providers taking greater risk in order to close deals, with regard to COLA? So that's a very valid question, and we are seeing a lot of deals where which are essentially in contrast to the trend observed in 2022. In 22, there were instances of providers pushing for higher COLA values, but this year, we started providers being more conservative and willing to make concessions, in order to close the deal. And in a few cases, even situations similar to what we saw in 2018, 19, 20, where there are actually COLA waivers, for specific years within the deal. So that trend is likely to be on the comeback this year.
Yeah. Okay, looks like that's all the time we have today. We'll just take 1 minute perhaps to talk through the next page, and then before we close out. So yeah, just as a reminder, we as Everest Group, we assist procurement teams in capturing value from services through both memberships and projects. So should there be anything which any of the participants would want to speak about, do feel free to reach out. And this page is just a bit of a snapshot of our coverage. Okay, with that, just a word of thanks to everyone for joining in. It was great interacting with you. And like I said, the questions which we've not been able to answer, we'll try and connect with and answer one-on-one. Thank you so much.